going to learn in this segment is how a nerve conducts impulse. A very unique feature of the nerves. We call it as conduction of impulse. Now, if I consider this as our neuron, which actually represent the nerve, what we find that there is regular interval, you will find that charges had been getting reversed at point A, at point B, at point C, at point D, at point E, and at point F. There are some changes occurring, and that changes is carried from one point to other, and thus we say that nerve is conducting impulse. To understand in a better way, let's take an example, magnified image of an exoplasm. This is the axon. So if you see this outer membrane, this is the one. If you see this membrane, this is the one. So these are the two membrane. Inside this region is the cytoplasm region. So this yellow part, what you're saying is the cytoplasm. The cytoplasm of the axon is called exoplasm. So these are the two membranes, and inside there is a cytoplasm. So what I am able to see that outside there is an ample amount of sodium, large amount of sodium. Inside we have potassium and negatively charged amino acid, that means proteins. So outside there is an ample amount of sodium, large amount of sodium, and inside there are negatively charged protein and potassium ions. Because of this state, we say that outside is positive and inside is negative. And that too during which phase? During non-conducting phase. So during non-conducting phase, which is also called resting phase, we find that outside there is a large amount of sodium. Inside there is potassium and negatively charged protein. Because of this, outside charge is positive, inside charge is negative. The potential difference, if I find, because if there are positive and negative terminal, we can find potential difference. The potential difference across the membrane is minus 70 millivolt. This potential is called as resting potential. So whenever there is a potential of minus 70 millivolt, we call it as resting potential. Is not conducting any impulse. This is referred as resting potential. Now next, here there could be a possible MCQ. What is that MCQ? They may ask, what is most common extracellular cation? Extracellular means outside the cell. So answer is sodium. Intracellular cation means inside the cell, so that is potassium. So extracellular cation is sodium, intracellular cation is potassium. This is true for every cell. Every cell in general, extracellular cation is sodium and intracellular cation is potassium. So during non-conducting phase, we find that outside charge is positive, inside charge is negative, and the potential difference is minus 70 millivolt. This potential, we call it as resting potential. Now, let us say this neuron gets a impulse, means neuron gets a message. The moment neuron gets a message, its sodium gate open up. When the sodium gate open up, what happened? Sodium start moving from out to in. Just have a observe, it is closed, but the moment neuron gets a message, sodium gate open up, so sodium start coming in. From outside, all the sodium start moving in. So what happens here? Sodium comes in, sodium gate becomes inactive. This process of sodium coming in is called as depolarization. So what happens? The moment neuron gets a message, its sodium gate open up, sodium start coming in, which we call it as depolarization. Because sodium is coming in, what happens? Now outside becomes negative and inside becomes positive. Outside becomes negative and inside become positive. Potential of 30 millivolt is achieved. Potential of 30 millivolt is achieved. This is called as action potential. This potential of 30 millivolt is called as action potential. From resting potential to action potential take place because of opening of sodium gate. The process is called as depolarization. The moment action potential is generated, potassium gate open up. See, potassium gate open up. So the moment potassium gate open up, potassium moves out. Potassium moves out. But this is not a normal condition for a cell, because cell want potassium in and sodium out. But here the condition is sodium is in and potassium is out. That will not be a normal. So what the cell does, it activate sodium potassium pump. It activate what? Sodium potassium pump. Now remember, whenever it is a pump, it will require energy. So it will require energy in the form of ATP, adenosine triphosphate. And because of this ATP, this sodium potassium pump works. How it works? It pumps out 3 sodiums. See, 3 sodiums are being pumped out and 2 potassiums are pumped in. 1, 2, 3 sodium out. See, blue one, 2 potassium in. 3 sodium out. 2 potassium in. 3 sodium out. 2 potassium in. And for operating this pump, we require energy in the form of ATP. See, A3 phosphate, that is adenosine triphosphate. So that is helping in. So what it's doing? It is using the energy in the form of ATP and pumping out the sodium, pumping in the potassium. So this will continue. This process is called repolarization. Repolarization. Because of repolarization, what happens? Now outside become positive and inside become negative. And we once again achieve resting potential of minus 70 millivolt. So from resting to action and action to resting again. This entire time period, we call it as refractory period. This entire time period. What time period? Time period of depolarization to repolarization is called as refractory period. Means from this step to this step and from here to here. This entire phase will be called as refractory period. This was resting potential.
During refractory period, neuron shows zero conductivity. That is, they do not conduct any impulse.
Once the action potential is generated, that is carried further. At this point, action potential is first generated. See, positive come inside, and then that is carried to next point, and then it is carried to next point, then it is carried to next point. That means action potential moves in a particular direction till the time it reaches the axonic bulb. Till the time it reaches the axonic bulb. Now, when a neuron is carrying the impulse, definitely it has to pass to the next neuron. So junction between the neurons is called as synapse. Junction between the neuron is called as synapse. There are 2 types of synapse, chemical synapse and electrical synapse. Chemical synapse is more common. So we will first try to observe how it is. This is one of the neurons. So this is presynaptic neuron. This is postsynaptic neuron. This is axon. This is dendron. So it is called exodendric synapse. Exodendric synapse. What happens here? We see that there is a presynaptic membrane, which is always the axon one. We have postsynaptic membrane. Postsynaptic membrane shows the presence of receptor. Axonic bulb has neurotransmitter, which are present in synaptic vesicles. Now, what happens here? There is a gap between presynaptic membrane and postsynaptic membrane. That gap is called as synaptic cleft. That is called as synaptic cleft. Is that clear? Next, just try to observe this diagram. What happens here? Let us consider this is a presynaptic neuron gets the action potential. See action potential. So what happened here? Calcium gate open up. These are the calcium gate. Calcium is coming in. That calcium direct the synaptic vesicle to release neurotransmitter. That neurotransmitter bind to the receptor, and because of that, sodium gate open up. The moment sodium gate open up, sodium comes inside the postsynaptic neuron and it generate action potential. Once it generate action potential, this is carried further. Repetition again. Calcium, see, calcium come inside. It direct the synaptic vesicle to release neurotransmitter. Neurotransmitter bind to the receptor, due to which sodium gate open up. Sodium start moving in. The moment sodium comes in, action potential is generated, which is carried further. See here, gun, and the process continues. So remember, when a neuron passes the information to other neuron through a chemical, we call it as chemical synapse, and that chemical is called neurotransmitter. Most common neurotransmitter is acetylcholine. Most common neurotransmitter is acetylcholine. I hope we are clear with the conduction of impulse across a synapse. Let me take you to electrical synapse. See here, this is a two synapse we are showing you side by side. One is electrical, other is chemical. In case of electrical synapse, you will find presynaptic membrane and postsynaptic membrane are almost fused. So there is no what? Synaptic cleft. While in case of chemical synapse, you can see there is a big synaptic cleft. Are you getting it? Here, impulse is directly carried across a membrane. In this case, you will find the chemical release goes and bind to the receptor, and then impulse is carried. In case of electrical synapse, conduction is faster. So we say that there is no synaptic delay, which is observed in chemical synapse. There is no synaptic fatigue, means there is no chance of this neurotransmitter getting exhausted. What happens in chemical synapse? Sometimes the neurotransmitter get exhausted. If they get exhausted, there will be no conduction of impulse. That condition we call it as synaptic fatigue. So in electrical synapse, there is no chance of synaptic fatigue. Where you find electrical synapse? Basically we find it in cardiac muscles. Entire whatever I have taught you till now can be summarized like this. Sodium is going out. Potassium is going out now. Now the pump start. See, pump is pumping out 3 sodium in. When the sodium gate open up, sodium goes inside. Potassium goes out. Because sodium is in, potassium goes out. The moment potassium goes out, sodium potassium pump operate. It pumps out 3 sodium and pump in 2 potassium. Hope I am clear with this. A neuron potential is at minus 74. We call it as resting potential. The moment sodium gate open up, the potential keeps on rising. See, potential is rising. This phenomena we call it as depolarization. It reaches the action potential. Now potassium gate open up, sodium potassium pump operate. Now it's come down. This we call it as repolarization, means sodium is going out. Okay, now it come back to the resting potential, but it do not stop here because sodium potassium pump is operating. It still become negative more, and then a lower value triggers the normal functioning again, and it come back to resting stage. So remember, this potential which was rising and coming back, whatever time it has taken place, we call it as absolute refractory period. Depolarization to repolarization. And the time when it had become more negative is called as relative refractory period. The actual process of depolarization to repolarization is called absolute refractory period, and the time period is referred as relative refractory period when it becomes more negative, potential becomes more negative. That is really very short. So relative refractory period is very short, and whenever there is a refractory period, neurons do not conduct impulse. मतलब neurons ने depolarization होके repolarization तक जब तक नहीं complete हो जाएगा, नया impulse carry forward होता नहीं है. दूसरा सबसे इंपॉर्टेंट पॉइंट, देयर इज अ थ्रेशोल्ड स्टिमुलस. थ्रेशोल्ड स्टिमुलस इज -15 मिलीवोल्ट. मतलब कोई भी स्टिमुलस अगर वो -55 को क्रॉस नहीं करेगा ना, देन दैट इंपल्स विल बी नॉट कैरीड. तो कोई भी मैसेज को कैरी करने के लिए मिनिमम स्टिमुलस व्हिच इज रिक्वायर्ड इज 15 मिलीवोल्ट, देन ओनली दैट मैसेज कैन बी कैरीड. एंड ए टाइम पीरियड देखो, मिली सेकेंड्स में रिप्रेजेंट किया. So refractory period is somewhere around 0.2 milliseconds. You can consider it's extremely small. This action potential, many books says 30 millivolt, some books says 40 millivolt. It's fine. Okay.
Subscribe channel for more such videos.